Bob Dylan famously once sang, "Not much more to be said. It's the time of the end. I'm going, I'm going, I'm gone." Well, I'm not going just yet, but it is nearly the time of the end. So, fortunately, the Danish hacker and flight attendant who was taken to the Antibes palace, she was sat between the heavy bodyguards in the back of the car because Tedeschi wanted to make sure this was all going to go off okay. Otherwise, he was probably going to, do her in or find out exactly what's going on. So there was a long delay while the Russian oligarch contemplated whether he should sign the contract, which would give him possession of the painting, and he would then have to send the money to SBL Bank. And after a fairly long delay, they finally achieved both of those things. So Tedeschi came back out of the house, back into the car where the Danish agent was being held, and drove out of the estate. And then Tedeschi, yeah, we've done it, meaning he sold that painting, which the Camorra had stolen, and $500 million had been sent to the SBL Bank. Which the Camorra owned. Okay, so as soon as that happened, and then the flight attendant, they took her back to Nice. That was sort of decent of them. They took her back to Nice, and she tidied up the interior of the aircraft because she was still acting out like acting the role of a flight attendant. And they departed, and then she left Nice airport, but Gabriel and his colleagues picked her up and said, "Look, we don't have much time. That money's just been sent to SBL." And so she immediately gets busy with the hacking to divert that money, hack SBL Bank and divert the money to the Ukrainian government. $500 million, which, if you don't mind me commenting, is a big help, but not nearly as big as the $90 billion that can now be sent by the European Union financial institutions to help Ukraine. Now that another kind of Camorra-like character who only looks after himself, only interested in wealth and power, like the Camorra, has been replaced by what? By the force of the people. And that was very significant part of this last part of the book. As I said, the theme evolves of how can democracy resuscitate itself. And so the remainder of the story switches to the Vatican, because Gabriel takes the real painting back to the Vatican. We find out, as we kind of already knew, that this chap Bertoli, Archbishop Bertoli, was behind all this, because behind the theft, because he was in trouble as the, if you like, the accountant and chief of Vatican affairs. He knew about this Mayfair building that wasn't worth much, and he tried to find a way of paying the SBL Bank, knowing that it was all Camorra related, and that's why he arranged for the possibility of the theft of the painting originally. So now the rest of the story is how he gets found out and he gets demoted. He had a huge, this is another good point, he was living in the biggest apartment in the Vatican, while the Pope himself was living in a very small apartment to demonstrate, the humbleness, like Christ. And then the next part of the story is the Pope goes on a trip to Lampedusa, the island where the immigrants, had come to try and get into Europe, and many had met their death on that trip. And he held a big meeting in another, it was also on Lampedusa, I think, or another neighboring island or country, where the people, he preached about the importance of helping the people and against corruption as part of the theological doctrine, and the people loved it. And then he came back to Rome and then every Sunday in Rome they have the Angelus, which is a prayer session devoted to the time when Mary found out she was going to give birth to Jesus, and he preached that. But to cut a long story short, the Camorra have found out now that they've lost $500 million and they're pissed as hell. And of course, guess what? Guess what happens? Well, Gabrielle and another lady who had helped him, who also had been a former lover of the Pope before he was the Pope, were present in the grounds in St. Peter's Square, and the Camorra had sent an assassin to kill both the Pope and Gabrielle, because they'd figured out that he was in it up to his neck. Okay, so what happened is that assassin did take the shots, and one of the shots hit the Pope right in the chest and put an end to that Angelus, and they closed the gate, closed the windows and everything, and there was absolute panic. And Gabriel immediately spun into action, and he thought that this assassin was going to shoot. He shot 2 more shots, and Gabriel thought it was for him, but the lady who was with him, the former girlfriend of the Pope, who still loved the Pope, by the way, was shot. But fortunately, she survived, and even more fortunately, the Pope survived because he was wearing a bulletproof jacket. Okay, and that's pretty much the end of the story. The guy behind it all, that Archbishop Bertoli, was sent off to atone in a very poor regions, and that was his atonement. The Pope survived, and there were a few other little side stories involving Gabrielle's family, and that was the end of the story. So I'd just like to say 2 things that many readers will probably not quite realise on their first reading. There are many little points that are very hard to see what's going on, but they're halfway through you realise there's this rather political, can I say, point about, well, it's political because it's about power, about how people should resist the kind of power that wants to serve its own interests through accruing wealth on even more power, versus the kind of power that's what they call servant leadership, where the leaders in the government is genuinely motivated to help the common people and make the life of the poor more decent and more contented. And that theme emerges. Yeah, that's about it. So I hope that has motivated you to actually read this for yourself. There are plenty of little side episodes that I haven't mentioned, but the story book is well worth reading for the highly topical political message. When I say political, I don't mean taking sides, I mean about the nature of power, okay, and the nature of morality, okay, what is good. Okay, justice is good, freedom is good, pain and oppression is bad, right? That message is in there. That's not hard, that's not politics, right? That's just about, if you're a nasty person, that's what you want. You want the power and money, you don't care about the others. And if you're a nice person, it's the other way around. Okay, and then the challenge, the intellectual challenge of trying to actually follow what's going on. But now, if you've listened to all these videos, right, and you listen to them a couple of times and then read the book, you'll totally get it. Whereas, it's like mathematics, okay? You can't follow some piece of mathematics, but if you keep going back to it, and if somebody tells you what it is that's blocking your understanding, right, then you will get it. And I think you'll enjoy the book much more. So cheerio for now.